Shin Megami Tensei Nocturne, also known as Shin Megami Tensei Lucifer's Call in Europe, was the first game of the series to be localized. It is a third main entry, legendary for being one of the hardest JRPGs of all time. So today we are going to take a look at 10 things you may not know about this great, but also brutal nightmare of a game. Number 10. Reboot. Shin Megami Tensei Nocturne was the first of the series to be released outside Japan. It was obviously a surprise, considering its controversial nature, but it managed to pull through. The game was a commercial success all around the world, especially in Japan, taking the series into a different direction. The truth is, however, this last statement was done in purpose. Koichi Okada, the producer of the game, said that it was a true successor to the series. Not only a continuation, but also a new Shin Megami Tensei, different from its predecessors. To differentiate it, they added the subtitle Nocturne to it. The first titles had all been dungeon crawlers in first person, however, this game was in third person. Atlus wanted to give a lot of emphasis to the new main character, but we'll get to that later. Another reason why they changed this was because allegedly, and according to Kazuyuki Yamai, one of the writers of the game, there were many reports of people getting 3D sickness condition, like a motion sickness, with first-person shooters in Japan. So they thought by rebooting the series, they will give players something to focus their attention on, in this case, the main character, therefore fixing the problem. Number 9. Director's Cut. Nocturne was a huge commercial success in Japan, like I mentioned before. It sold almost 250,000 copies by the end of 2003. Nevertheless, this wasn't the number Atlus had in mind, so they weren't exactly satisfied. A director's cut version was then released in January 2004, also for the PlayStation 2. This version included additional features and content that had been cut before. One of the new features was the appearance of Capcom's character Dante from Devil May Cry. This director's cut edition was called Maniacs. It was even more successful and popular in Japan, so Atlus even did a reprint of it, and that is exactly the version that was localized outside Japan. So we didn't get the original, but instead the improved and complete experience of it. And nope, barely anything was censored, just slightly altered for Western audiences. Number 8. Why the hell was Dante there? Everybody's familiar with the fact that Dante from Devil May Cry is in the game. There are even memes about it all over the internet. But what most people don't know is the reason behind his inclusion. Like, why, out of all guest characters that could have added, was Dante chosen? Did Capcom and Atlus make a collaboration of some sorts? Nope, it was just the developer's idea and the influence of the Devil May Cry series around the world. The setting of these games and Dante's job as a demon hunter totally fit the one in Nocturne. Plus, some of the staff members were huge fans of the game. So as to give a small push into advertisement, considering Atlus was not as big as other companies were back then, they asked Capcom for the rights to include him. After being approved, Dante featured as a boss and as a playable character in the Maniacs version of the game. Yup, no other major reasons were involved. Number 7. Anti-pop culture. Idols have always been a major trait in the Japanese modern culture. In most JRPGs, there's always at least one female character that represents the idol stereotype, especially when they take place in a modern setting. The Shin Megami Tensei games, however, have never alluded to this. In Nocturne, there is a smaller number of important characters. This was done to emphasize the individuality of each one of them. The director of the game, Kaneko Kazuma, has a favorite, Yuko, because of her dual nature. When asked about her and the lack of idol-like girls, he stated that there are characters female players can also sympathize with, meaning there doesn't always have to be an idol stereotype. Due to the dark nature of the story and the duality of its characters, developers rejected the idea of involving too much of the modern Japanese pop culture. And if there is some, it was precisely in order to criticize it. Number 6. Inspiration and influence. Only die-hard fans of this game seem to be aware of the fact that Nocturne was something really big. Not only did it have a lot of mythological influences, but also a lot of artistic inspirations. In several interviews, developers have stated that they wanted to make the game revolve around the many layers of Buddhism. Shin Megami Tensei means true goddess metempsychosis, the latter word referring to the unending process of birth, death, and rebirth in that religion. Many of the game's ideas came from different theories of it, including the inverted earth, also known as the vortex world, the Magatama, and the mannequins. However, the mannequins were explicitly detailed as the representation of the sheep type of humans, the one that always follows a majority without question because of the strength in numbers instinct. Nocturne also took inspiration from the movie Apocalypse Now, which, just like the game, represents the journey of a human being into the depths of a living hell. In the end, Nocturne was a huge project with tons of references, deep influences, and dark inspirations. Number 5. The game over sequence impact. Another major characteristic of Nocturne, both profound and thought-provoking, was the game over sequence. It was just 25 seconds of the main character in a wide setting, as if going into a downward spiral made by flying angels. Okada and Kaneko explained it was yet another influence from a couple of things. First, the Sansu River, also known as the River of Three Crossings. It is a mythological river in Japanese Buddhism, where the souls of the deceased must cross it by one of the three crossing points, a bridge, a ford, or a stretch infested by snakes. The weight of one's offenses while alive determines which path they must take. In other words, determined by the Great Will. The Divine Comedy also influenced the story layout, considering the many interactions the character has with Lucifer and the Inferno itself. In the game over sequence, the concept was to represent people who went through near-death experiences and how they all seemed to have felt as if they were descending into a tunnel. Giving it symbolic and metaphoric nature, just like the Sansu River and the Divine Comedy, this sequence was left to the player's interpretation. Number 4. Back to the primitive. Earlier I said that Atlus put a lot of emphasis on the main character, right? He not only represents all of the influences and ideas put into the game, but also converges them to the player. His tattoos came from the image of a shaman in order to represent the origins of gods and demons, being often metaphors for parts of nature. So the protagonist is a personification of a shaman, somebody in contact with the spirit world, surpassing a simple existence. Even the protuberance at the back of his head has a deep meaning. Kazuma Kaneko, the artist and one of the directors of the game, explained it. Supposedly, that is a part of the character's brain, which awakened because of the Magatama. Shin Megami Tensei Nocturne takes place in a modern setting, despite its post-apocalyptic surrealism. In a way, it predicted the future in real life on how people will often depend on mobile devices. However, the protagonist doesn't seem to use any kind of this. Producer Koichi Okada explained that since he's turned into a native existence, becomes a demon, and has no more use for electronic devices. In other words, developers were trying to emphasize the primitive ideas versus the modern ones. Humans depended on nature back then, now they depend on technology. There's a lot more about the influences of the game, its inspirations, and a lot of details involving the main character in a couple of interviews that I'll leave in the description of this video. I strongly suggest you check them out. Number 3. Legacy. Thanks to most of the previous things I mentioned in this video, Nocturne became a major influence itself in storytelling for video games. A narrow-minded Western culture slowly began opening its doors to sensitive and religious topics, with the game paving the way. Which is the reason why, after this, we started seeing more and more plots defying all types of philosophies and religious ideas, especially in role-playing games. Just like the game Xenogears had done so 6 years before. Censorship of such themes was always a big dispute outside Japan. Given the enormous controversial content Nocturne has, it came off as a huge surprise when localized. Thankfully, and like I said before, it was a critical success, so in a way it told the world that it was okay to question religion and human existence. Therefore, it made a big difference. That's just how important this title is in the history of gaming. Number 2. Remake. In August of 2018, an interview about Shin Megami Tensei 5 took place in a Japanese magazine. Kazuyuki Yamai talked about the development of the game, but also about how anxious Atlus was to remake or port Nocturne for a modern system. His quote, "We're constantly considering a port or remake of Shin Megami Tensei Nocturne. We're thinking we want to watch for an opportunity." This led to all sorts of rumors on the internet about the possibility, hyping the game once again. Nonetheless, it also showed how the attention, money, and effort were still in other titles, most notably Atlus's own Persona series. They have overshadowed the Shin Megami Tensei franchise, but that doesn't mean it's dead. If Atlus is showing in good faith their intentions of working on a remake of probably the most popular and beloved game in the series, it wouldn't be wrong to assume that maybe someday Nocturne might just return. Number 1. The real reason behind its difficulty. So the game's legendary for being one of the hardest JRPGs of all time, at least outside of Japan. Actually, the series had been already popular for being very hard over there, even when its first main titles. When it was localized, Nocturne received strong criticism for its brutal difficulty, so Atlus decided to come forward to explain. Turns out they had indeed made the game really hard on purpose. This was not only because they wanted to reboot the series, but also because they wanted to connect the players with the game itself in a deep level. Nocturne is all about power and strength, and yes, it does show clearly in its story and gameplay. From an interview that I'll leave in the description, the staff stated the following. "In this game, we wanted to show off different styles and reasons for living. People who live to pursue strength, people who are strong, people who pursue them, people who first establish themselves in a group like this, but this is revealed to be different from the stance they will take when they are inside the group, and so on." In conclusion, Nocturne had to be a very hard game, or it just wouldn't have made any sense otherwise. Anyway guys, that was my list of things you probably didn't know about this legendary game. Don't forget that if you already knew them, that doesn't mean others did too. So if you know more things about it, feel free to include them in the comments. Thanks for watching, don't forget to subscribe and share this video with your friends. See you next time!